If you haven't heard about Anchor, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. Please, let me explain. 1, it is free. 2, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from the phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many others. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It is everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So please, download the free Anchor app and go to anchor.fm and get started today.
During today's episode, we continue on with Season 3, Suicide and Hope, and today's segment is based on listening.
I think I would just like to reiterate what Brandon and I have said over and over in this session. Listen, listen, listen. And take all threats, even veiled threats, of somebody choosing to end their life. Take it very seriously and get them help.
I try my best not to lie, but when I'm dealing with a suicidal person and they ask me not to tell anyone, I will tell them, I will make the biggest lie to your face, but you know I'm going to tell someone.
It shows we care, and it shows we're with them in this journey. Even if you've heard the story 14 times, if you're willing, non-judgmentally, to sit with them and listen, and listen, and listen, and listen.
So please, stay tuned as we dive into this discussion on listening.
The Ear, Evangelical and Reformed Christian Podcast. Welcome to The Ear, the Evangelical and Reformed, a Christian podcast that urges you to think deeper and draws you closer to God through faith. Through powerful sermons, teaching segments, and discussions, The Ear hopes to give you a different perspective on secular topics from a Christian worldview. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Please welcome your host, Brandon Queen.
Good morning, podcast world, and welcome to yet another episode of Season 3, Episode 2 of Suicide and Hope with Barbara Roberts. As you know, Miss Barb is the author of With Her Last Breath, and we are basing this series off of her book. And she joined us again for yet another episode. Due to our busy lives, we often do not take the time to listen to the ones we claim to love. Listening is an important tool that we as humans possess. We should use this to our advantage because you never know who will need you to listen. Sometimes listening can be a life or death situation. You know, Brian H. McGill once said that one of the most important sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. We as Christians are taught in Proverbs 15:4 that the soothing tongue is the tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. So then, we ought to be mindful of what we say to a person who might be battling depression or the thought of taking his or her own life. Take the time to listen, get the hurting person help, and just show the love of Christ to them. All right, Ms. Barb, welcome back to the show, and I'm glad you're able to join in with us on this topic that needs to be talked about.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It's a privilege to be here.
Awesomeness. All right, so as you all know, my name is Brandon Queen, and it is a joy and a privilege to be the host of the Air podcast and being a Christian and biblical commentary on topics that are of the secular realm, often getting wrong views, if you will, from people who don't understand or know the gospel. We are here to bring light and shed light on topics like suicide and topics like depression and stuff like that. So we're going back to the book With Her Last Breath. And again, keep in mind, we're running a free giveaway. And due to a good friend of mine, we are actually increasing the amount of giveaways. So we went from 5 to now 10. which is pretty awesome. So with that being said, first question of the morning is this, Miss Barb. Why wouldn't anyone want to go to heaven as soon as possible?
That's an interesting, ponderable question, Brandon. Um, and I think probably something we need to keep in mind through that question and any pondering about it is that God's timing may not be our timing. In fact, it probably isn't. And he has his time for us to go to be with him. So taking our life into our own hands and us making the decision when to go to heaven by ending our life is not what pleases him. And so I think that's a pretty simple answer to what could be a very complex question. But, I think, again, God has a time for us to go be with him, and he doesn't want us to choose and have that time be earlier than we might have.
Right. Now, I want to read the first sentence off of page 21 of your book, and it's part of Kathy's suicide letter, or journal, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And she stated, imagine that heaven is a million times better than here. And of course, here is earth. And then she says, there is no better place to be, no more tears or sorrow of any kind, only joy and peace. So when I read that, I'm like, okay, well, she's got that right. She is absolutely right about heaven and her perception of heaven because it's described like that in the Bible. My question kept going back to my mind. What was so weighing on her and holding her back to make her ask the question, why wouldn't anyone want to go to heaven as soon as possible?
I think Kathy had a really tough life. Started out as a little girl, very, carefree like little kids are, and many things entered her life. And for those who have read the book or will read the book and read her 26-page journal, they will get a flavor of Kathy's tough life. And so, I think Kathy is in one way, it's interesting because she's speaking truth, certainly. Who wouldn't want to be in heaven? I mean, as opposed to being here. And yet, in another way, it's an escape. What she's alluding to is, why would I want to stay here? I want to be in heaven.
Right.
And sure, that's a fact, but the way she did it wasn't what God had in mind.
Right. And I agree. And we'll never know. We'll never know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
So this topic we're talking about is going to be titled listening. And I think it's important that we as a body, you know what? Let's scratch the whole Christian thing for a minute and let me say this. We as the human race lately have had a hard time listening.
Yeah.
As a collective group, we don't listen well.
Yeah.
All right. So my next question, Ms. Barb, is how do we truly listen to our loved ones or friends that are suffering from any thought of suicide or depression?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is pretty simple. 2 words, undivided attention. Because so often when we say or we think we listen to somebody, we listen until they take a breath, and then we begin our own story or our own answer to a question or our own thoughts. And I think really, really listening to somebody is giving them the attention they need from us and being more concerned about them and their hurt and their story than our own. Sometimes, and we've all experienced this, Brandon, when somebody starts talking about something they're going through, it triggers a thought in our mind of what we went through, similar. And so if we're not careful, and if we don't really practice what I'll call the art of listening, then we quickly jump in with our own story. And for somebody who's hurting, who's depressed, who may be thinking of ending their life, that is exactly what they do not need. They need somebody to walk beside them in their pain and really be willing to listen to their pain, no matter how hard that is.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I call those types of people that will interject a story.
Mm.
Oh, I have to outdo her story or his
Yeah,
story.
yeah,
And at times I can look at people and say, okay, that story never happened because every time I tell a story, you have to try to outdo me.
yeah.
I know several people like that. And it's like, okay, when you're dealing with someone that's depressed or
Mm,
suicidal,
mm.
shut up. I hate to be
Yeah,
so, you know,
exactly.
so
Yeah. No,
brash
but
and
you're
harsh.
right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And then that horrible show I talked about last week, 13 Reasons Why, I
Yeah.
decided to watch some of the series,
Oh, wow.
just to kind of get a feel of what it was.
Mm,
And I was right. I absolutely hate the show.
mm,
It's
mm,
this girl that's going through a lot. Now, she went through some very traumatic things. I'm not going to take that from her.
mhm.
But how she targeted everyone that interacted with her life and said that it was their fault,
Wow.
that
Mm,
she committed suicide. Now, this
mm,
is a whole different spectrum here. And
mhm,
it's very different from what Kathy did.
mm.
Kathy
Yeah,
was concerned about how her family would feel. She was
yeah,
worried about what they would think, worried about what her friends would think.
yeah.
So she, and I'm not saying the girl on 13 Reasons Why wasn't sick in a way or depressed or suicidal in a way, but her, like the character's suicidal thoughts were selfish versus
Mm.
Kathy's, and this is going to sound strange, was very compassionate.
She really was, wasn't she?
It
Yeah,
was very compassionate.
I know. I
I-
know.
it's like I don't want to do
Which
this.
makes it even more confusing, doesn't it?
It does. Like I'm sitting here
Yeah,
scratching my head, like, okay,
I
you
know.
loved your family, you were compassionate,
Yeah,
but only the Lord knows why.
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
and that leads to my next question: why is it so hard for us to listen to God? Now, this is
Mm,
just us as a whole. We have a
mm,
hard time listening to God, and
yeah,
you know, you are a
yeah,
caregiver. In a way,
yeah,
I'm a caregiver.
yeah.
When did we learn to shut up?
Well, you're right. And you know how it is when somebody that you know really well, like me, I know my husband Ken's voice really, really well.
Hmm.
Well, I think we collectively don't often practice really listening to God. All through the Bible, God's voice is clear, what he has for us, his love for us. And sometimes when I'm praying with somebody who's hurting, I'll pray, Lord, help us to hear your voice above any other, because we get so caught up in hearing other voices and we're just not used to listening to God's voice, so that um, we this might sound funny, but we don't know what he sounds like.
Right.
um, there's a verse in the book of James in the Bible that says, if any of us lack wisdom, we just need to ask God and he will give it. Okay, he's promised if we need to hear him on a certain subject, we need to ask and he will give it. There's another passage that says, my sheep hear my voice. So we need to be willing to be quiet and listen. And I don't think we're very good at that often.
Right. And I wish we were. I think the world would
Yeah,
be
I know. I
so
know.
much better.
I know.
But and that brings me to the Bible verse that states,
Mm.
be still and know that I am God.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
straight out of Psalms.
Yes.
Psalms 46:10 to be exact. It's
Yeah.
to be still and know that I am God. Now,
Yeah.
looking at this, because we're English speaking people, looking at it word for word,
Mm.
let's break down what each word means.
Mm.
Okay, be still. Okay,
Mm.
you are a being, so you can't change who you are. But to
Yeah.
be still, like, just clear your mind of all the garbage and the
Mm.
social media posts and the news outlets and all the stuff they put out and TV series.